When I was first invited, the topic was about pirates, creators, of course, and I thought for a while that they would be speaking about pirates due to the fact that it is true that the pirates are not the persons we think they are. To make a long story short, I represent some 300 artists who have sold hundreds of millions albums all over the world, and none of them has ever been paid by a record company. Those, I want to say, the pirates are not the ones who think they are. Now, the issue I was asked to talk about is the issue of creators and talent, and really, the relationship between, I would say, today's creation and talent. And the underlying topic was, is talent enough to be a creator today? The first thing which I want to point out is we're using today the word creation, which has no real legal meaning, because when you use the word creation, you think about copyright. And when you think about copyright, one opposes copyright, which is what we call usually droit de la propriété, literary and artistic property, which we oppose usually to invention in the field of industrial property. The problem is the process of creation today has totally changed, and the difference and the boundary between invention and creation is very slim. Very clearly, creation has been modified through the use of technology, and it affects differently the publishing industry, music industry, and the audiovisual industry. It's also clear that in all those fields, talent is not enough, and this is due to what I will explain shortly, is to the fact that the offer in all those fields is far superior to the demand. Now, if we look into the publishing industry, and I'm starting with the publishing industry because writers are also at the origin of music and also now of many audiovisual works. What has to be taken into account is that during the last century, the issue of printing books was something very costly because one was using lead typefaces, and the investment in book was very heavy. One had to produce large quantity of books, which led to huge stocks which had to be financed. And this led to the fact that the publisher in the last century was to some extent the producer of the book. Now, does it work? Yeah. And here comes the very important point. Since the publisher was, no, you have to go back. Since the publisher was considered as the producer of the book to some extent, he was granted an exclusive exploitation right by the publishing agreement, and this usually for the duration of the copyrights. The publisher could also sublicense a translation to foreign countries, and in such case, the author would only receive a royalty of 50%. The thing which I want to point out is that 150 years ago, translations were very rare. I'm giving the case here of Emily Bronte. The book Wuthering Heights of Emily Bronte was translated into French only 75 years after it had been published in England. Now, of course, this is totally different. When a book is successful, those days it's basically translated immediately. Furthermore, when an author is known to be a successful author, translation rights are already sold before even the original book is published. What is very important in this scheme is due to the fact that the publisher was granted all the rights through the publishing agreement until he was exploiting so long he was exploiting the book, the success of one book could mean the success of the publisher for, many, many years. I'm giving the example of Le Petit Prince of Saint-Exupéry, which was published in 1943. It was translated in 270 languages and has sold 150 million copies during a 70-year period. During the past 10 years, Le Petit Prince has still sold about 1 million copies a year. It's just to show that, you know, the person who publishes Le Petit Prince has made a fortune and is ensured to continue to do so. However, Le Petit Prince will now fall into the public domain in the next months. But the same can be said about the comics of Tintin by Hergé, and of course, Asterix and so on. With the development of the moving industry, books are also now exploited as audiovisual exploitation, and I would say there is a relationship between the books and movies, but very strangely, the relationship can be the other way around. I just want to point out that a few weeks ago, which is the last week of April and the first week of May, in France, L'Écume des Jours of Boris Vian, which was a book published in 1947, suddenly became #1 in sales in France as a book, and this was due to the fact that the audiovisual adaptation had just been carried out in the theaters. The thing which is want to point out on a legal point of view is that in France, I don't know if it's the case in Portugal, but in France since 1996, audiovisual adaptation has to be a separate contract from the publishing agreement. So if you want to adapt a book into a movie, it has to be a separate agreement. The rights granted to the publisher do not cover the audiovisual adaptation. What is very important also to know is that approximately 7 weeks ago at the Paris Book Fair, it has been decided between the publisher and the Ministry of Culture that in the next months we would modify the French Intellectual Property Code to create a specific contract for electronic publishing. Today, when in the publishing agreement, you usually also can grant publishing rights, electronic publishing right, but this will cease to exist in the very near future, and electronic publishing will necessitate a separate and specific contract. What is important, of course, is that the publisher usually, under the law, loses its publishing rights if he ceases to sell the book. Very important point, which is specific to France and which I want to point out, is that in France, writers and journalists also enjoy from a legal remuneration to compensate those authors from the photocopying of their work. This collecting society in France is called the Centre Français du Droit d'Exploitation de Copie, CFC, and I just want to show you that in 2012, it has collected 45 million euros from paper copies and 15 million euros from electronic copies. And I have only an older figure. In 2008, it has paid over, this collecting society has paid over 7,500 euros to 248 publishers, and 423 works have received over 7,500 euros from the CFC. Some newspapers receive amounts up to 2.6 million a year. This is just to say that this is an area where there is a new system of legal remuneration, and apparently the collection works rather well. Now, I must point out that the money theoretically paid for photocopying is paid to the author, but through the publisher, and the publisher often do not pay back the money to the authors. Now, the issue is that technology now permits to everyone, with the use of a computer, a word processing software, to become a writer, and also, you know, it's very easy now to print. And so anybody can also become its own publisher, since digital copying and printing allows the copying of books in small quantities at reasonable cost. To some extent, very clearly, one does not need anymore a publisher to finance the printing of a book as it was the case before. Now, the issue that we have here is that also through the internet, books can be distributed as electronic books, at no cost. But the key issue of distribution still remains. What I want to point out, it's not because you can, make your own books easily, print them, even distribute them on the net, that this will lead to success, which is the issue of the talk this day. Publishers are used to distribute books very clearly. If it's a specialized book, it's better to still go through a publisher. And it's also very difficult for a mere writer to also distribute and sell his book. So what is important and must be pointed out here is that the role of publisher has shifted from producing, which is financing books, to really marketing and distribution, and also to negotiating translations. And here is the core issue that we have in the field of books. If I take France last year, 76,205 titles were published, and out of those, 50%, which is about 40,000 titles, were brand new titles. But in total, in France, officially, there were 690,000 French books that were in print and sold on the French market. And when you look at those figures, which are, huge, in comparison, one notices that only 43% of French people never buy any books. That means that only, basically half of the French people are buying books, and among them, there is a majority that buys only 1 to 5 books a year. So, this is to point out that, again, the demand is concentrated on a small amount of books, and that's the real issue, is how to, become a writer that can enter into the small amounts of books which are really sold by the thousands. Now, very clearly, the book market comprises various segments, and marketing strategy are different between the segments. The public usually learns about new books from book critics, through newspapers, radio, TV, etc. But it's also very clear that to become a bestseller, a book needs more than a good review by a critic due to the large number of titles which are offered for sales. Now, it's also, when you look at the books which have become bestseller in France, I'm talking just really about French, what I would consider being French books, not, English translation or things like that. But already, the first problem is the issue of buzz. No book can become a bestseller in France if it's not the subject of a buzz. And, I was speaking about French book, but very strangely, the book which has been #1 in sale in France during the past months is the book called 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James, which has been promoted everywhere as a kind of erotic book. I must point out that I am mentioning here the book in 3 months last year sold 490,000 copies, and this day in France it is now considered that the book has sold 3 million copies. So, in short, it has sold 6 times more copies in those past 6 months than it had the first 3 months. We could give many other examples about books that, became really national bestseller and sometimes were the subject to translation because they made the buzz to some extent. I'm giving an example of Bernard Weber. I'm sure his books have been translated into Portuguese. He became, instantly famous in 1991 with a book was about ants, which was immediately translated in 37 languages and which has sold 20 million copies. We had also a book which was very successful. It even had a prize, an important literary prize, which is the book of Jonathan Little, Les Bienveillantes, which has a protagonist, a fictional protagonist, a former SS officer, And it really made the buzz in France, and it sold nearly 1 million copies. But very strangely, that's typical. The book made the buzz in France and sold 1 million copies, but had difficulties in selling in the translation. Currently, again, I'm giving an example of Germany. The book which is apparently selling well in Germany is a book called ist wieder da. I don't know if you heard about this. It's a satirical fiction book which tells the story of Hitler, who wakes up in 2001, and in a couple of weeks in Germany, 360,000 copies were sold. And it must also be noted that immediately people have started negotiating translation and were awaiting the French translation in the next weeks. Thus, this to point out that the market has become a worldwide market, but competition has become worldwide. That it's become more and more difficult for national authors to access to this market. Now, I just want to also point out a case which is well known, the case of John K. Rowling's, that everyone knows in Portugal. And I am sure that everyone here knows also that her success was to some extent due to the fact that a literary agent who received the book, her first manuscript, really believed that it would become a success. And very clearly, without the help of her literary agent, the book would never have been successful. This again shows that some person like literary agent can play an important role to find the appropriate publisher for a book. Now, I must also point out that J.K. Rowling had problems selling her first manuscript because nobody would believe that the book directed to teenagers would become a literary success. One knew that books for very young children could be successful, but not for teenagers. So the success of Harry Potter really has opened a new segment in the industry, and you now have many authors in this segment. I'm mentioning Susan Collins with the books Hunger Games, Stephanie Meyers, the books Twilights, and that shows that the worldwide success of an author can really generate a new market segment which was inexistent before. Well. Now, the music industry, the situation is really different in the music industry. First, because in the music industry, you have on one side usually authors and composers, and on the other side, usually the recording artist. It's a system with, two people participating. And of course, then you need to have a record producer who finances the recording. Now, technology permits to compose, to record a song at the same time, and this recording that you create at no cost can be distributed on the net. So the role of record company has shifted again, like it is in the publishing industry, from financing to marketing and distribution. The issue in the field of music is that to become a hit song must be heard by the public, who will then buy the records or download, the records. And the issue that we are facing in this field is that the broadcasting of music is very, very limited compared to the number of records that one finds. I am giving an example, a very precise example. In 2001, 2002, during a 14-month period, Énergie, which is a French musical station, has broadcasted only 655 different tracks, which is 655 different songs. And one of those songs, which was Can't Get You Out of My Mind by Kylie Minogue, was broadcasted 1,529 times, which is over 1% of the airings. 12 songs made 11% of the airings. So it's very, very difficult. if you are, a Portuguese singer who makes a record, if you're not well known, to have your songs broadcasted on the radio and, of course, also on the TV. Thus, clearly, talent is not enough. And in France, what we have found to facilitate the entrance of talents in the musical field is that since 1986, quota have been imposed to all French radio stations. In short, they must play at least 40% of French songs. This is to limit the number of US and American songs and also English songs. And they must at least broadcast one new talent per hour. And this permits, to some extent, some entrance to new talents to the musical market. Again, if one looks at the singers who have emerged in France during the past years, one realizes the few talents which have emerged from contests on TV shows. However, out of the 22 winners of those shows during the past 10 years, only 4 or 5 have remained popular and successful. This also shows that instant fame does not mean a long-lasting success. And if talent is, important, it's very clearly necessary, but is also not enough. On the worldwide scene, one noticed also that 2 artists have really emerged on the world scene during the past 10 years. I'm really talking on a worldwide basis. And, one is Amy Winehouse, who died in 2011, and Lady Gaga. And when one looks at those 2 artists, one can see that they are very extreme artists, which show that, they made the buzz with other things than just their musical talent. Again, it's, one must capture the attention of the public by things which are beyond just the musical field. The issue that we have in the music industry is that revenues comes from many sources. Authors and composers receive royalty, which are usually collected and paid by collecting society. Artists receive usually fees for their performance live on stages, and also royalties, and I'm putting this on bracket, from their recordings, and also legal remuneration from collecting society. Whereas producers receive revenue from the sale of their recording and legal remuneration from collecting society. Thus, we have a large variety of money that flows from various sources, but in all those categories, you have collecting society that play an important role. And the problem that we face here, that's something that we can discuss later on, is that, of course, collecting society do not redistribute most of the money they collect. In the movie industry, the situation is far more complex, since a movie is the result of the contribution of a large number of co-authors. The issue is that we still need someone to take the lead of these co-authors and carry on the whole project, and this is usually done by the producer. Clearly, the producer still remains a driving force. On the market and in terms of talents and emergence of talents, one must distinguish between audiovisual work, which are broadcasted only on TV, and movies which are shown on theaters. Now, to facilitate the emergence of talents in the audiovisual industry, what has been done in France is that TV channels are forced by the law to subsidize the production of French movies. When you are the owner of a TV channels in France, you must subsidize French movies and also, how can I say, broadcast movies that you have subsidized among your channels. Thus, this permits the access to a quota of French or even European movies to French TVs. The legal obligation generates a demand for French audiovisual works, and thus is also at the origin of new talents in the audiovisual industry. The other issue that we have is that we have set up a system that also makes that movies cannot be shown directly on TV. They have first to be shown in theaters. But the big problem that one faces here again is that the offer far exceeds the demand. Every year, approximately 600 new movies are shown in French theaters, and it's the same issue that we have for books, since 30% of the French people never go to the theaters, and 70% of the French people who go to the theaters go only to see a movie once a year. And 5 is usually the average number of movies which is seen by somebody who goes regularly to the theater. In short, 10 movies usually capture 80 or 90% of the total audience, and that's the problem that one is faced with again. Since the average person goes only 5 or 6 times to the theater a year and must select between 600 movies, his choice again will be made according to the buzz generated by some movies. You often also the type of movies, for instance, very clearly, Disney movies are usually very successful every year for the kids. And very often one chooses also movies because of the actors. Speaking about actors, I want to point out something which is very interesting. In the United States, an actor is paid for a movie according to the sums the previous movie has made during his first weekend. I don't know if I'm clear in my explanation. An actor, the value of an actor is exactly the gross income of the previous movie he has made during the first weekend the movie was launched. This is the amount he gets for when he's paid for a new movie. Again, if one looks at France, one sees that movies which had access to success are again movies that have generated some buzz. For instance, I'm thinking to the movie Intouchable in France, which made the buzz because it was a movie with somebody who was in a wheelchair and something apparently very strange. In conclusion, what I want to point out is that the new technology facilitates, writing and publishing of books, composition of music, recording of songs, etc. Creation, to some extent, has become more easy, especially for those who lack real talent. But very clearly, due to the fact that one has more and more creation, and due to the fact that this creation is in a worldwide environment, it becomes harder and harder for a work to find its audience, to become a bestseller or a hit song. Talent shifts from creation to marketing, and mere talent is not enough. To some extent, one must also find a businessman or a partner who is a businessman and who can generate the buzz around the creation. Thank you.